Good evening and welcome to Singapore Tonight. I'm Dawn Tan.
And I'm John Leong. Thanks for tuning in.
Our top story tonight, Transport Minister Lui Tuck Yew has decided not to stand for re-election in the coming general election.
This was revealed today in an exchange of letters between Mr Lui and Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong that were released to the media. Imelda Saad reports.
Mr Lui Tuck Yew said it is with deep regret that he is not standing for re-election in the coming general election. He also said in his letter that he had broached the subject with the Prime Minister early this year. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and several senior members of Cabinet had tried to persuade Mr Lui to change his mind. Mr Lee had also signalled his intention to reappoint Mr Lui as a Cabinet Minister if he was re-elected at the coming elections. But Mr Lui felt that the elections provided an opportunity for him to step back from politics without causing any major disruption to government at the end of its term. In his letter to the Prime Minister, Mr Lui said, "You reminded me that the responsibility of government was a collective one and no minister carried difficult problems like public transport alone. I deeply appreciate the reassurance and support, but having thought the matter carefully, I have decided that I should stand by my original decision." Mr Lui is a two-term MP. The former Chief of Navy came into politics in 2006, standing in Tanjong Pagar Group Representation constituency. He has served as Minister for Information, Communications and the Arts and also in the Defence and Foreign Affairs Ministries. Following the 2011 general election, Mr Lui was elected as Member of Parliament for Moulmein Kallang GRC. That GRC has since been dissolved after the latest boundary changes. Mr Lui was appointed as Transport Minister in 2011, a portfolio that has proven to be extremely challenging, with several train disruptions causing unhappiness on the ground. It's an issue that he also brought up in his letter to the Prime Minister. Mr Lui said, "We have had several setbacks, including two major disruptions on the north-south, east-west lines. Large-scale or prolonged disruptions still happen more frequently than is acceptable." He added that the government has embarked on major upgrades to the rail network, as well as added new capacity to ease congestion on buses and trains. For example, new trains have been introduced and the total train fleet will continue to grow some 50% over the next 3 to 4 years. And the downtown line will open within the next 24 to 30 months. Still, Mr Lui said, given the nature and scale of our rail network, these improvements will take time. He added the measures put in place will allow the problems to be progressively dealt with and resolved. In his response, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said he reluctantly accepts Mr Lui's decision and that he is disappointed that he did not succeed in changing Mr Lui's mind. Mr Lee said Mr Lui has done very good work as Transport Minister and noted that public expectations were high when Mr Lui took over the transport portfolio in 2011. He said that both he and Mr Lui knew then that he had a very difficult job, but Mr Lui had not hesitated in taking up the challenge. Mr Lee said Mr Lui put his heart and soul into the task. As a result, significant progress was made over the past 4 years. But Mr Lee noted the job is not yet complete, as seen in the train services breakdown from time to time. But despite these incidents, Mr Lee said he's confident authorities are heading in the right direction to get the public transport system that Singaporeans deserve. Mr Lee added he and his senior colleagues share the view that Mr Lee had more to contribute, both in transport and other areas in government. But despite having discussed the matter with Mr Lui several times, they could not persuade him to continue. And the Prime Minister had no choice but to accept Mr Lui's decision not to stand for election again.
Our Deputy Prime Minister Teo Chee Hean said as Transport Minister, Mr Lui Tuck Yew has put all his energy into improving the country's transport system.
In a statement today, Mr Teo said the programs Mr Lui has implemented have begun to show results and will improve the transport system significantly in time. Mr Teo said he's known Mr Lui for more than 30 years since he was a young officer. He said Mr Lui has served with honour and distinction and has brought commitment, an analytical mind and compassion and concern for people to every responsibility he has undertaken.
It was Mr Teo who had encouraged Mr Lui to serve in politics, as he thought those were important qualities for leaders. Mr Teo said he had tried to persuade Mr Lui to stay on, but was unable to change his mind. He added that he respects Mr Lui's decision to leave politics and thanked him for his service. Now, ministers and MPs have expressed their heartfelt appreciation to Mr Lui Tuck Yew for his contributions to the transport sector and residents in Moulmein Kallang GRC. In a Facebook post, Minister in the Prime Minister's office, Chan Chun Sing, said Mr Lui has been a stalwart in steering Singapore through challenging circumstances in the transport sector. He also thanked Mr Lui for his care and concern for workers in the transport sector.
Communications and Information Minister and fellow Momain Kallang MP Dr. Yaakob Ibrahim said it has been a privilege to serve alongside Mr Lui in the GRC in the last 4 years. He said Mr Lui's commitment to his residents is unwavering and that he and his residents will be sad to see Mr Lui go.
Fellow GRC MP Denise Phua, who entered politics in the same year as Mr Lui, said he is a diligent and sincere leader who treats his residents, grassroots and activists with respect and dignity.
In an interview with Chinese daily Lianhe Zaobao today, Mr Lui was asked about his decision to step down. He dismissed rumours that it was over his health or the health of his wife.
Mr Lui said it had nothing to do with family or health reasons. He did acknowledge, though, that the transport portfolio is all-consuming in terms of time, energy and focus. With elections looming, he said it was an opportunity for him to step away from politics. Mr Lui noted, though, that setbacks are part and parcel of any portfolio and any job.
Asked about his future plans, Mr Lui said he has none right now. And he has informed Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong that he will not make any plans until he's handed over properly to the next Transport Minister. He said the most important thing is to continue to devote all the time and energy in his transport portfolio. Mr Lui said he will continue to help out in the coming election by introducing the new candidate to replace him to branch members and to the grassroots. Now, one political analyst we spoke with says Mr Lui's decision to leave politics might create an unhealthy precedent.
Minister Lui's departure from politics, may perhaps set an unhealthy precedent, right, in which ministers may be expected to take personal responsibility. And I think here was a situation in which it wasn't as though things were getting from bad to worse. I think here was a situation in which there had been significant improvements, but it may not have come at a pace that would have may have met the public expectations.
So, what does this mean for the People's Action Party at the upcoming general election?
On balance, Minister Lui's departure, is not going to remove transport issues, from the election agenda. We can be sure the opposition parties, would raise it. But what it does also is, I think, if Minister Lui were to contest, in the next general election, that the team in which he would be a part of, assuming that he contests in a GRC, would become, the lightning rod, of public unhappiness, at least in that particular electoral division, and that could affect, the overall performance of Minister Lui's team.